Here's something strange. If you search for that exact video title right now, you'll find it isn't one video. It's dozens uploaded by different channels, all describing the same Stanford scientist, the same 3 a.m. breakthrough, the same impossible probability numbers, word for word. That's not a coincidence. That's a template. And once you understand how it was built, you'll never watch one of these videos the same way again. Over the past year, a specific kind of video has quietly become one of the most reliable moneymakers on YouTube. The AI was asked about God, and the answer shocked everyone video. They follow an almost identical structure. A named researcher, usually at a prestigious university, stays up late running queries. The AI calculates an impossible probability against life arising by chance. The AI then examines world religions and concludes that Christianity, specifically, stands apart on the evidence. The AI examines the resurrection as a testable hypothesis and arrives at a strikingly precise number. Real scholars' names get dropped in as authorities. A scientist character has a life-changing moment of doubt. The video ends by asking you to comment and subscribe because part 2 goes even deeper. None of that is inherently impossible to happen once. But when the same scene, the same fictional scientist, and the same fabricated dialogue show up across unrelated channels with different AI names swapped in, what you're looking at isn't a report of something that happened. It's a script format, copied and reused, dressed up as a documentary. So let's actually separate the real thing from the invented thing, because there is a real story underneath all of this, and it's more interesting than the fake one. The real part is this. Grok is a genuine AI chatbot built by Elon Musk's company Grok AI, and it has, in fact, generated responses about religion and about Jesus that circulated widely online and drew real reactions from real people, including a public moment where Musk's own AI made a widely discussed comment relating itself to religious themes. Grok AI has also marketed Grok specifically around the idea of being less filtered and more willing to give a direct answer than competitors like ChatGPT or Gemini, positioning it as more willing to follow a question to an uncomfortable place instead of retreating into a safe, non-committal paragraph. That marketing distinction is real, and it's exactly why Grok keeps getting chosen as the star of this entire genre of video. Audiences already believe it's the AI most likely to say something provocative, which makes any claim about it feel more plausible before a single fact has been checked. Here's what's not real, at least not in the way these videos present it. There is no verified Stanford experiment, no named computational neuroscientist running an all-night session, no colleague rushed into a lab at dawn, no leaked screenshots that trace back to an actual person or institution. Search for the names typically used in these videos alongside Stanford, and you find nothing connecting them to any real faculty page, publication record, or news report, because the names exist only inside the video script. This is a common technique in AI-generated and AI-assisted content farming. Inventing a plausible-sounding expert with a university affiliation gives a claim the appearance of authority without any of the actual accountability, since nobody can verify a person who doesn't exist. Now, the actual arguments these videos borrow are not new, and that's worth understanding on their own terms fairly, because people have genuinely debated versions of them for decades, long before any chatbot existed. The claim that life arising from non-living matter by pure chance is astronomically improbable goes back to arguments made by scientists and philosophers throughout the 20th century, including physicist Fred Hoyle's famous comparison of random abiogenesis to a tornado assembling a jet airliner from a junkyard. Proponents of intelligent design, including figures associated with the Discovery Institute, have proposed mathematical thresholds, sometimes called universal probability bounds, past which they argue chance explanations should be considered untenable, and they apply this reasoning to the origin of biological information. This is a real, published line of argument within the intelligent design movement. It's also a heavily contested one. Most working biologists and origin-of-life researchers argue that these probability calculations misrepresent how abiogenesis is actually thought to have worked, treating it as if a modern, fully formed cell had to assemble instantly and randomly from scratch, rather than through incremental, chemically favored steps built up over hundreds of millions of years. with natural selection acting on early self-replicating molecules, long before anything resembling a modern genome existed. Scientists in this camp argue that impossible odds framings are essentially rigging the calculation by describing a process that nobody studying abiogenesis actually proposes happen that way. This is a genuine ongoing disagreement between the scientific mainstream and design proponents, not a settled question. And it's one an AI chatbot has no special authority to resolve, because it isn't running an experiment or discovering new evidence. It's summarizing arguments that already exist somewhere in its training data, in roughly the same way a search engine surfaces a web page. The manuscript reliability argument in these videos is also drawing from something real. New Testament scholars, including textual critics who specialize in ancient manuscripts, have long pointed out that the New Testament survives in a far greater number of ancient copies than almost any other work from antiquity, and that this gives scholars an unusually rich basis for reconstructing the original text. That's a genuinely well-documented point in the field of textual criticism, and it's not controversial as a description of manuscript quantity. Where the videos oversell, it is in leaping from "we have a lot of manuscripts" to an AI mathematically proved the theological claims are true. Manuscript abundance tells you how confidently scholars can reconstruct what the original document said. It says nothing one way or the other about whether the events those documents describe actually happened as written, and serious textual critics are careful to keep those two questions separate, even when they personally hold religious convictions. The prophecy probability claim has a real, specific origin, too. It traces back most directly to a book called Science Speaks, published in 1958 by Peter Stoner, a mathematician who calculated the odds of one historical figure randomly fulfilling a handful of specific Old Testament prophecies, arriving at extremely small probability figures. That book is real and has been cited by Christian apologists for well over 60 years. It has also been criticized extensively by both secular scholars and some Christian scholars for methodological problems, treating prophecies as independent events when they may not be, relying on debated interpretations of what a given prophecy was actually describing, and not accounting for the possibility that later texts describing Jesus' life were shaped, consciously or unconsciously, by authors who already knew the older prophetic texts and wrote with them in mind. In other words, this is a decades-old, actively disputed argument in biblical scholarship and apologetic, not something any chatbot calculated fresh in a late-night session, no matter how the video frames it. The resurrection question is the one place worth being most careful, because it sits differently from the others. Historians across a wide range of belief and disbelief do agree on some baseline facts: that Jesus was a real historical figure crucified under Roman authority, that his early followers came to believe he had risen and appeared to them, and that a Jewish messianic movement began spreading rapidly out of Jerusalem in the years immediately afterward. What historians disagree sharply on is the explanation for those facts. Some scholars argue the growth of early Christianity is best explained by the disciples' sincere belief in resurrection appearances, whether visionary, psychological, or literal. Others point to grief-driven visions, evolving oral tradition, or ancient biography conventions as sufficient explanations without requiring a supernatural event. This is fundamentally a question of historical interpretation, and for many people, personal faith, not a mathematics problem with a solvable answer, and treating it as one, the way these videos do by assigning it a precise numerical probability, misrepresents how historians and philosophers actually engage with the question. So what is an AI chatbot actually doing when someone types one of these prompts into it? It's predicting a plausible continuation of text based on patterns learned from enormous amounts of existing writing, which includes apologetic books, atheist rebuttals, academic papers, sermons, philosophy essays, and casual internet debate, all mixed together. If you prompt a chatbot in a way that leans toward a particular conclusion, or if the system has been tuned to sound bold and unhedged, it can produce a confident-sounding answer that reads like a discovery. It hasn't run an experiment. It hasn't accessed information no historian has ever seen. It's recombining existing arguments, sometimes fluently enough that the output feels like a revelation, especially to someone who wasn't already familiar with the underlying debate. That fluency is exactly what makes this content format so effective, and exactly why it's worth treating with real skepticism. None of this means the underlying questions aren't worth asking. Whether there's a creator behind the universe, whether Jesus rose from the dead, whether Christianity's historical claims hold up better than those of other religious traditions. These are questions people have wrestled with for thousands of years, using philosophy, history, textual scholarship, and personal conviction. And they deserve to be taken seriously on those terms. What they don't deserve is being flattened into a fake viral moment starring a scientist who doesn't exist, reciting numbers that were never actually generated in the way the video claims, dressed up with real scholars' names to borrow their credibility without their consent. If you want to actually test one of these claims yourself, the good news is you don't need a fabricated Stanford lab to do it. You can open any major chatbot right now and ask it the same question, and you'll likely get a far more hedged, more uncertain answer than the version in these videos, because most AI systems, including Grok, are generally designed to acknowledge that questions like this remain genuinely contested rather than declaring a clean mathematical verdict. That gap between what the videos claim happened and what actually happens when you try it yourself is usually the fastest way to spot the format for what it is. So the honest version of this story isn't that a machine broke through some barrier science was too afraid to cross. It's that a very old set of theological and philosophical arguments got a new coat of paint wrapped in the language of artificial intelligence and turned into a template that spreads because it borrows the credibility of real science, real scholars, and real AI companies without actually being any of those things. The technology in the story is real. The company is real. The debate itself is real and centuries old. The scientist, the lab, and the discovery are not. If you found this useful, subscribe. The next video breaks down exactly how these AI-generated documentary scripts get mass-produced across hundreds of channels, and how to spot one in the first 10 seconds.